Imagine setting out on the perfect winter adventure, conquering the challenging peaks of the northern Ural Mountains. You are young, skilled, and with a team of your most trusted friends. But instead of ending in triumph, that journey ends in a scene of chaos so terrifying, so contradictory, that nearly 70 years later, no one can agree on what happened. This is the story of the Dyatlov Pass. A true life horror story that blends forensic facts, military secrets, and chilling paranormal theories into the most enduring mystery of the 20th century. Our story begins in the Soviet Union, at the Ural Polytechnic Institute in Sverdlovsk. It is January 1959. Leading the expedition is the man who would lend his name to the tragedy, Igor Dyatlov, a brilliant 23-year-old engineering student and an expert skier. Dyatlov had assembled a team of 9 skilled ski hikers, all students or graduates of the institute. They were all physically fit and experienced in multi-day challenging winter treks. This was not a group of amateurs. Their goal was officially deemed a Grade 3 trek, the most difficult rating available across the remote parts of the Sverdlovsk Oblast. The destination was Mount Otorten, a peak in the far northern Urals. The name itself is prophetic. It loosely translates from the local Mansi language to "do not go there." The team consisted of 10 people when they began the trek on January 25, 1959. However, just a few days into the journey, one member, Yuri Yudin, suffered a severe bout of sciatica and was forced to turn back. He said goodbye to his friends and returned to the nearest settlement, Vizine. He was the last person to see the group alive, a decision that had ultimately saved his life. The 9 remaining hikers pushed on. Their route took them through dense taiga forest and across frozen plains. Dyatlov was meticulous. He kept a journal and photographs were taken, documenting the trek right up to the final moments. The group was expected to reach their destination and send a telegram back to their institute to confirm their safe return by February 12th. When the date came and went, there was no message. Initially, this was not a concern. Delays were common in this type of brutal weather. But as the days stretched on, an uneasiness began to grow. By February 20th, the Institute and the families demanded a full-scale search operation. The massive search effort began, involving students, teachers, the Soviet military, and local police. The clock was ticking, and the vast frozen wilderness was unforgiving. The search originally focused on the area around Mount Otorten, but the group was found nowhere near their intended destination. Instead, on February 26th, searchers spotted a strange disturbance high on a slope about 13 miles south of Otorten. This slope was part of a mountain the local Mansi people called Kolet Sivokl, which chillingly translates to Dead Mountain. The search team found the Dyatlov group's tent, and this is where the mystery truly begins. Because the tent was not merely empty, it was an immediate, terrifying paradox. The tent was pitched awkwardly on the mountainside. Most critically, it had been violently cut open from the inside using knives. It was still partially standing, covered in fresh snow, but the canvas had been slashed. The investigators found most of the group's winter gear still inside. Their heavy fur coats, their boots, food, cooking equipment, and even their meticulously organized diaries. The investigators immediately understood the implication. Whatever happened to the hikers, it happened so suddenly and with such paralyzing fear that they abandoned their only source of warmth and shelter in sub-zero temperatures, using knives to desperately carve their way out instead of simply using the front zipper. Outside the tent, the forensic picture only became stranger. Investigators discovered a trail of 8 or 9 sets of footprints leading away from the tent and down the slope towards a dark, dense forest about 1 mile away. The nature of these footprints was deeply disturbing. They indicated that the group was unshod. Some were barefoot, others in just socks, and some in a single shoe or felt boot. The temperature that night was estimated to be between -13 degrees Fahrenheit and -22 degrees Fahrenheit. They were heading into certain death. The trail of footprints led the searchers to the edge of the forest, to a massive, thick cedar tree. And here, under the shelter of the tree, they found the first two bodies. The bodies belonged to Yuri Krivonishenko and Yuri Doroshenko. They were dressed only in their underwear and socks, and the remnants of tattered shirts. A small crude fire pit was found nearby, containing charcoal and the ends of cedar branches. It was a futile attempt to survive the freezing conditions. Both bodies showed signs of severe distress. Krivonishenko and Doroshenko had significant abrasions on their hands, particularly their knuckles and palms. These injuries suggest they had frantically climbed the cedar tree, tearing away at the branches. Why would they climb the tree? To search for the tent? To look for a rescuer? Or to escape something from the ground? The official autopsy on these two first bodies concluded the cause of death was hypothermia. Given their state of undress and the extreme cold, this finding was not surprising. However, it still begs the question, what force drove them, naked and terrified, from the safety of their tent? The search continued, focused on the path leading back up the hill towards the abandoned tent. Not far from the cedar tree, they found the third body, the group leader, Igor Dyatlov. Dyatlov appeared to have been struggling desperately to return to the tent. He was partially dressed, and his body was in a position suggesting he was crawling uphill when he collapsed. His watch had stopped at 5:31 a.m. Further up the slope, they found Zinaida Kolmogrova and Rustam Slobodin. Both were also heading uphill, back towards the tent. Like Dyatlov, they were better clothed than the two by the cedar tree, suggesting they had grabbed what they could before fleeing, or perhaps taken clothes from the dying. Slobodin was found to have a small but significant skull fracture. Kolmogrova had severe bruising on her side, consistent with a hard fall. However, the cause of death for all five was recorded as hypothermia. They froze to death, having fled a terror unknown. But the most devastating discoveries and the greatest challenges to the simple hypothermia explanation were still 3 months away, buried deep beneath the snow. The discovery of the first five bodies, all dead of hypothermia, all attempting to crawl back to the tent, confirmed that the group had panicked and fled. But the mystery was still incomplete. 4 hikers remained missing. For 2 months, the search team scoured the mountainside. It wasn't until the spring thaw in May of 1959 that the final 4 hikers were located. They were found 82 yards deeper into the forest at the bottom of a deep ravine. Buried beneath 13 feet of snow and ice near a small stream. The 4 victims were Lyudmila Dubinina, Semyon Zoltarov, Alexander Kolvetov, and Nikolai Brignoles. The autopsies performed on these last 4 bodies are the source of the incident's deepest controversy, as they completely shattered the simple hypothermia narrative. Nikolai had a severe crushing skull fracture. The force required to cause such damage is immense. Even more shocking were the injuries sustained by Dubinina and Zolotarov. Both Dubinina and Zolotarov had devastating crushing injuries to their chest and ribs. Zolotarov had 5 fractured ribs and Dubinina had 10. The severity of these breaks was described by the forensic pathologist as being comparable to injuries sustained in a major car crash or being hit by a heavy piece of machinery. Crucially, there was no external wounds corresponding to these massive internal injuries. No massive bruises, no cuts, no bleeding that would indicate a fistfight or a struggle. It was as if a massive blunt force had been applied with external pressure, leaving only the internal organs and bones damaged. This fact alone moves the incident from a tragic hiking accident to something profoundly disturbing. Adding to the horror was the state of Lyudmila Dubinina's body. She was found missing her tongue, eyes, and parts of her lip and jaw. The initial Soviet report suggested this was the result of decomposition and post-mortem scavenging by small animals in the stream where she lay. However, the precise, clean removal of these soft tissues, especially the tongue, has fueled decades of speculation about torture or some kind of chemical trauma. The clothing revealed another bizarre fact. Unlike the first 5 who were scantily dressed, the final 4 were better protected, having taken clothes from the dead or dying. Dubinina was wearing Krivonoshenko's pants. Zolotaryov was found wearing Dubinina's fur coat and hat. This act of cannibalizing clothes confirms that the group survived the initial terror and was attempting to organize themselves deep into the forest. But perhaps the most damning and strangest piece of physical evidence was discovered during the forensics examination of the clothing. High levels of radiation were detected on several garments, particularly those worn by Krivoshenko and Dubinina. One garment reportedly had 4 times the normal background radiation level. The investigators at the time were told the radiation was insignificant and could have been picked up from an unknown source. But the presence of radiation combined with crushing injuries and the immediate classification of the case became the fuel for the grandest and darkest theories that the Soviet state was involved. Let's recap the facts for the last time before we move into the official conclusion. 9 experienced hikers. Their tent was cut open from the inside. 5 died of hypothermia fleeing barefoot. 4 died of crushing internal injuries with no external signs of trauma. 1 was mutilated, and radiation was found on all their clothing. What force on earth could account for all these contradictions? That was the question the Soviet investigators were tasked with answering. The investigation was intense but brief. Within months of the final bodies being found, the Soviet authorities closed the case. The official conclusion was that the hikers died to a compelling natural force they were unable to overcome. The key facts were simply filed away and never publicly explained. The tent cutting, the barefoot flight, the crushing internal injuries, the radiation, and the strange mutilation. The case file was immediately classified and sent to a secret archive. Access was restricted for decades. The entire area of Kholat Syokol was completely sealed off to both skiers and researchers for 3 years after the incident. This rapid closure and aggressive secrecy immediately bred deep, widespread suspicion. If this was simply a tragic accident caused by a massive blizzard or hypothermia, why the need for state-level secrecy and classification? The Soviet government's actions transformed the case from a tragedy into an international cover-up conspiracy. In the years that followed, surviving family members and former search team members pushed back against the official narrative. They believed the state was concealing something far more sinister, that the hikers had somehow stumbled upon a secret that cost them their lives. The speculation never ceased, but for decades the file remains locked. Then, in 2019, in an effort to finally put the rumors to rest, the Russian Prosecutor General's office announced it was reopening the investigation. The 2019 or 2020 investigation considered 75 different theories before settling on a final definitive cause, a cause that the government would hope closed the book forever. The final conclusion delivered by the Russian authorities in 2020 was that the cause of death was a slab avalanche or a wind slab. The official scenario: a rare kind of avalanche where a hard, heavy layer of packed snow, a slab, slides down the slope at a low speed, descended upon the tent. The impact of this heavy slab caused the crushing injuries to the 4 victims lying on the downhill side of the tent. Terrified, the remaining members frantically cut their way out of the tent to escape the snow and fled barefoot down the slope. They took refuge in the forest, but a blinding, paralyzing blizzard swept in. They couldn't find their way back to the tent, became disorganized, and succumbed to hypothermia. The final four, already severely injured, fell into the ravine and died from a combination of their trauma and the cold. While this theory, which was supported by scientific modeling, addresses the key issues of the panic and the crushing injuries, it has failed to satisfy the public and many experts. The major flaws in the avalanche theory. The location was not typical avalanche terrain. Search teams found no definitive evidence of a massive snow mass. The tent remained partially standing, which seems unlikely after a major impact. The theory cannot explain the radiation on the clothing. It also cannot explain the missing tongue and other strange mutilations. Because the official Soviet conclusion failed to explain the full picture, the incident remained unsolved in the public's imagination, giving rise to dozens of theories. We can divide these into two main camps, those that involve a hidden natural force and those that involve human or paranormal interference. Let's start with the theories that try to explain the panic and the trauma, using the laws of physics and nature, albeit extreme ones. One of the most compelling natural theories suggests that the hikers were driven to irrational madness by infrasound. Infrasound refers to low-frequency sound waves below 20 Hz, which are inaudible to the human ear. High winds whipping around the peak of Kholat, particularly in the shape of a Kármán vortex, a repeating pattern of swirling vortices, could have generated powerful, focused bursts of infrasound. Infrasound waves can permeate the human body, specifically affecting the brain. Exposure to strong infrasound has scientifically been linked to intense feelings of dread, panic, extreme anxiety, nausea, and disorientation. If the tent was suddenly blasted by an infrasound wave, it would have induced paralyzing terror in the sleeping hikers. They wouldn't have known what they were feeling or what was going on, only that they needed to flee immediately, explaining the slashing of the tent and the desperate barefoot rush down the hill. It was a mass-induced panic attack. This theory effectively explains the irrational flight, but it does not fully account for the severe blunt force crushing injuries sustained by the final four, nor does it address the radiation found on the clothes. Another theory attempts to explain why the hikers stripped off their clothing in deadly cold, paradoxical undressing. This is a known phenomenon in severe hypothermia. As a person approaches death from the cold, the body's peripheral blood vessels suddenly dilate, causing a rush of warm blood back to the extremities. The victim experiences an intense, overwhelming sensation of heat, causing them to frantically tear off their clothing. They are essentially stripping down to die. The 5 victims who died of hypothermia may have taken off their clothes right before they succumbed. This would explain why the 2 men at the cedar tree were nearly naked and why others had shed layers. The final stages of hypothermia can also induce disorientation, which might explain why they were crawling or staggering awkwardly. While scientifically sound for the hypothermia victims, this theory still fails to explain the initial panic that made them cut the tent, and crucially, it has no explanation for the deep internal trauma or the radiation. Even with its flaws, the wind slab or snow slab theory remains the strongest natural explanation. It's important to note that the injuries were consistent with a sudden hard blow or compression. The crushing force must have come from something natural and massive that struck them inside the tent. A rare, high-density wind slab, a thick icy layer of snow, sliding just a few feet onto a tent, could generate the necessary force to break ribs and skulls without leaving external bruising. This impact forced the others to flee, injured or not, into the night. Though scientifically plausible for the injuries, the radiation and the quick cover-up keep this story perpetually in doubt. Was it nature, or was it something more terrifying? When science fails to explain all the facts, suspicion turns to human intervention, or forces beyond our current understanding. These are the theories that have made the Dyatlov Pass incident a legend. The most enduring theory involves the Soviet military. The region was remote, perfect for secret testing, and the government's immediate classification of the case points to state involvement. The hikers may have stumbled upon a secret testing ground, or their deaths were collateral damage from a weapons test. The crushing internal-only trauma is consistent with a powerful concussive blast, a shockwave from an experimental weapon, perhaps a prototype rocket or a low-yield pressure mine. A shockwave can transfer massive energy through the body without tearing the skin. The radiation detected on the clothes points directly to a military experiment, likely involving a radioactive isotope or a specialized weapon. A blast or shockwave hits the tent in the dead of the night, instantly incapacitating the 4 victims with crushing injuries. The others, terrified and disoriented, cut their way out and run. The orange discoloration later reported on the bodies might be residue from a chemical or propellant, further suggesting a weapons test. The final piece of evidence for this theory is the account of other hikers in the region who reported seeing spheres of light or fiery orbs in the sky on the night of the incident. Were these experimental Soviet missiles or rockets? The original, simplest theory was an attack by the local Mansi people, who considered Koletsilako, or Dead Mountain, a sacred place. The Mansi were investigated and the theory was quickly dismissed. There were no signs of a struggle in the camp, and the severe internal injuries were not typical of an assault by primitive weapons. Most compelling, the forensic examination showed that the force that killed the final 4 was a massive pressure, not a series of blows. For those who believe the official and military theories are too neat, there remains the possibility of something completely inexplicable. The spheres of light seen by other groups were not missiles at all, but unidentified flying objects, or UFOs, or some other form of unexplained aerial phenomena. An alien entity or unknown energy source attacked the camp. This could explain the massive clean internal trauma, a directed energy pulse, the sudden irrational panic, the radiation, and the bizarre mutilation of Dubinini's face and tongue, a key element that no other theory fully satisfies up to this point. The lack of any forensic evidence of a struggle and the fact that the hikers' hearts and livers showed no signs of defensive damage has led some to believe the deaths were instantaneous or caused by a force they never had a chance to fight. They fled from a terror that was not human. If the spheres of light and secret weapons sound too modern, some theories look to ancient folklore and cryptids. Given the location in the extremely remote Ural Mountains, some researchers have proposed an encounter with the Russian equivalent of the Yeti, known locally as Almasty or the Chuchuna. The theory posits that the hikers were attacked by a large non-human territorial primate native to the Eurasian wilderness. The initial panic, the slashing of the tent, and the frantic flight could have been triggered by the sudden appearance of a massive, terrifying creature outside the tent. A large primate, acting defensively, could have used its immense strength to inflict the crushing chest and skull trauma on the 4 victims. These injuries would be consistent with the creature aggressively hugging or standing on the victim in the dark. The theory suggests the creature may have mutilated Dubinina, perhaps trying to eat soft tissue or displaying a peculiar aggressive territorial behavior. Accounting for the missing tongue. Like all cryptid theories, there is absolutely no physical evidence of a large non-human animal at the scene. No fur, no massive non-human prints, and no sign of a struggle with the creature. It also fails to account for the radiation found on the clothing, forcing proponents to combine it with the military theory, a Yeti and a weapons test. Whether you believe in the natural, the military, or the paranormal, one fact remains. 9 people died on that mountainside from a force so sudden and so strange that even decades of investigation cannot fully reconcile the physical evidence. The Dyatlov Pass incident is not famous because of a simple avalanche. is famous because of what that avalanche doesn't explain. We are left with 4 core enduring paradoxes. Why was the tent cut from the inside? Why did they flee barefoot into a deadly blizzard? What caused the severe, crushing internal injuries with no corresponding external trauma? Why was the evidence classified and radiation found on the clothes? While the 2020 official ruling points to a wind slab avalanche followed by hypothermia, the legacy of the mystery lies in the doubt. The government's history of secrecy and the sheer outlandishness of the injuries keep the military theory perpetually alive. The irrational fear and the spheres of light keep the paranormal theory in the conversation. The Dyatlov Pass incident is a haunting reminder that even in the modern age, high-tech forensic analysis can fail when confronted with an event of extreme, rare, and possibly clandestine terror. We may never know the definitive answer, but on that freezing night in 1959, 9 young, skilled hikers encountered a compelling, devastating force, whether of nature, weapons, or something completely unexplained, that forced them to make a desperate, fatal dash into the Russian wilderness. Their fate remains sealed beneath the snow of Dead Mountain. But the conversation doesn't end here. The mystery is yours to solve. What do you think happened to the 9 hikers that fateful night? Drop your theories in the comments below. If you haven't already, make sure to like the video and subscribe. And thank you for venturing into the dark with me. The world is full of things we cannot explain, but we'll keep looking. Until next time, I'm Kylie, and remember, the truth is often hidden by night.